been friends for years, closer than sisters, sharing everything from their secrets to their dreams. When BC got engaged, Sade was genuinely happy for her, at first. But the moment BC introduced her fiancé, Bayo, to Sade, something dark stirred within her. Bayo was handsome, successful, and everything she secretly desired. Sade was the kind of friend who celebrated your successes with you, or so it seemed. When her best friend, BC, did her traditional introduction rites ceremony to the dashing Bayo, Sade smiled on the outside, but inside, her heart twisted with envy. Sade couldn't shake the feeling that BC didn't deserve a man like Bayo. Why should she have everything while I'm left with nothing? Her jealousy slowly consumed her. BC and Bayo's wedding was just months away, but Ayo couldn't let that happen. She knew of the village herbalist Baba Olumide, rumored to have powers that could alter fate. And so, one day, she ventured to the edge of the village, her heart racing as she made her way down the narrow path to the herbalist's hut. Baba Olumide welcomed her in, his hut filled with the thick scent of burning herbs. "What brings you here, young woman?" he asked, though he already seemed to know. "I want to ruin my best friend's relationship. She is engaged to a man I want," she confessed, her voice trembling with greed and fear. The herbalist smiled, a knowing glint in his eye. "There's a price for meddling in love," he warned, but she didn't care. "Whatever it takes," she replied. "I want Bayo. I want him to leave BC and come to me," Sade confessed, her voice trembling with greed and fear. The herbalist smiled. "First we must break them up before anything else." He gave a charm to rub on BC's face. He asked to return when that was done. She left wondering how to get it on BC's face without arousing suspicion. A few days later, BC's mother traveled to her hometown and left BC alone with her brothers. BC invited Sade over to spend the night with her. Sade decided this was a good time. She mixed the substance and took it with her. That night, while BC slept, Sade lay down quietly until she was sure her friend was in a deep sleep. Then she got up and gently rubbed the substance on her face, then went back to sleep herself. The next day Sade returned to her home. Later in the evening, Bayo came calling to see BC. Upon seeing her, he started behaving strangely. He suddenly said he needed to leave. BC was confused at Bayo's behavior, but thought that maybe he was having a bad day. It was more than 4 days, and she did not hear from Bayo. He never stayed this long away without coming to see her. When BC got to Bayo's house and met him there, she told him she was worried and had come to check on him. Bayo told her that he needed some space and that he was feeling suffocated. He sounded nothing like the kind and gentleman she had come to know and love. BC walked back home sad and worried, not knowing what had happened to make Bayo this way. On her way back, she stopped at BC's house to share her worries. She consoles BC, telling her that maybe he is having difficulties with his business to give him some time. As BC walks away still crying, Sade smiles with a sinister look on her face. She is happy the herbalist's charm has worked. BC spends the next few days waiting for Bayo to come calling. She spends most of her days indoors crying. Unable to bear the silence anyone, she decides to go back to see Bayo one more time. BC stood outside Bayo's home, her heart pounding in her chest. She had been crying for hours, unsure of how to make things right between them. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the village, but the unresolved tension weighed more heavily on her than the fading light. "What are you doing here?" he snapped, his voice filled with anger. BC flinched at his tone, her hands trembling as she took a step back. I just came to check on you," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't need you to check on me," Bayo shouted, his voice echoing through the quiet village. "Just go, BC. You're the last person I want to see right now. This relationship is over." Tears welled up in BC's eyes, but she fought to hold them back. She didn't know what to say, only that she had to leave before her heart shattered completely. Without another word, she turned and walked away, feeling the weight of his anger pressing down on her back as she went back home. BC wept all the way home, unable to believe what had just happened. The next day, soft murmur of village gossip filled the air as Shade walked along the path leading to the market. Just as she was about to pass a group of women sitting beneath a tree, she caught Bisi's name being whispered among them. "Have you heard? Bayo told his friends he's done with Bisi," one woman said, shaking her head. Shade's ears perked up and she slowed her pace, positioning herself just within earshot, pretending to be distracted by something else. Inside, her heart raced with excitement. Eager for more, she returned to the herbalist, ready for the final charm that would bind Jide to her forever. But this time, Baba Olumide had other plans. As Shade stood before him, her desperation clear, the herbalist smirked. "You've come for more, but beware of what you wish for," he warned, his voice thick with a dark promise. Without hesitation, Shady nodded. "I don't care. I want him." But as Baba Olumide prepared the new charm, he whispered an incantation meant not for Bayo, but for Sade. The charm wasn't designed to win over the Bisi's fiancé. No, it was meant to bind Sade to the herbalist himself. As soon as Sade touched it, a strange warmth spread through her body, clouding her mind. Before she realized what had happened, Shady was hopelessly in love with the herbalist. She refused to leave the herbalist's home, and from that moment, she started to live with the herbalist as his wife. Her family started looking for her and were worried. Search parties were set up until they started to hear the news of her living with the herbalist. The sun had barely risen when Shady's parents arrived at the herbalist's hut. They had been searching for her, worried about the whispers spreading through the village. The moment they reached the hut, Shady's mother knocked frantically on the door, her heart pounding with fear and concern. The sun had barely risen when Shady's parents arrived at the herbalist's hut. They had been searching for her, worried about the whispers spreading through the village. The moment they reached the hut, the herbalist asked them what they wanted. They told him they wanted to take their daughter home. He told them to take her if she wanted to go with them. "Shady, please, my daughter, come back home." Her mother's voice trembled as she called out. Her father stood beside her, his face etched with worry. Her mother rushed forward, tears streaming down her face. "Shady, this is madness. You cannot stay here with this man. Come home, your family is worried about you." Shady stood up slowly, her eyes calm and steady as she looked at her parents. "I love him, Mama. I'm not leaving." But Shade remained firm, her voice unwavering. "No, I belong here. I love him." Her father's voice, usually calm and measured, cracked with emotion. "This is not the life for you, Shady. You belong with your family, not here with him." He glanced at the herbalist with disdain. Her mother gasped, her hands trembling as she reached for Shade's arm. "You don't know what you're saying. This isn't love, it's a spell. Shady, please come to your senses." The herbalist sat quietly, a sly smile playing on his lips, watching the scene unfold. Shady pulled her arm away gently from her mother's grasp, shaking her head. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life. I'm staying." They pleaded with Baba Olumide, and he told them slyly that they could take her home as long as she is willing to go with them, knowing fully well that she would never agree to go with them unless the spell was broken. Days turned into weeks, and Shady found herself trapped in a nightmare. The villagers began to notice that Shady had become the herbalist's wife, a position no one envied. She had lost herself to the dark magic, completely unaware of the chains that now bound her to Baba Olumide. She lived under his roof, obeying his every command, and yet she had no understanding of how far she had fallen. While Shady was lost under the spell, Bisi, heartbroken and confused by the sudden change in her relationship, sought help. A powerful man of God came to her help. With the spiritual intervention, Baba Olumide's charm lost its power. Bisi and Bayo reconciled, their love stronger than before. They married soon after, in a beautiful ceremony filled with joy and celebration, a stark contrast to the dark and twisted life Sade had been drawn into. Sade was oblivious to Bisi's happiness. She was trapped in a haze of enchantment, completely unaware that her plan had backfired. She was now the wife of a man she never loved, living in the shadow of her own greed. Just when Shade's fate seemed sealed, a new player entered the scene. Baba Olumide's son, Bode, was as cunning as his father, though his ambitions were darker. He had always been jealous of the power his father wielded over the village and wanted to carve his own path. When he saw Shade, he desired her for himself, but he knew he couldn't simply take her. She was bound to his father through the charm. Bode had learned a few tricks of his own from his father. He knew of an ancient oil that could break the hold of his father's charm. One night, while Baba Olumide was away on spiritual seclusion, Bode set out to act upon his plans. The hut was dimly lit, with the flickering flames of a few dying candles casting erratic shadows across the walls. The air was heavy with the scent of bitter herbs and incense. Shade lay motionless on the mat, her body still under the grip of Baba Olumide's spell. Her eyelids fluttered and she stirred slightly as if in a trance. Bode crept inside, clutching a small vial of ancient oil in one hand. His gaze lingered on Shade's face for a moment before he began to pour the oil over the charm on her wrist. As he whispered the incantation, he felt a surge of power course through him, the kind that sent a chill up his spine. It was a dangerous power, the kind that demanded a price. Shade awoke with a start. The fog that clouded her mind began to lift, and she became acutely aware of her surroundings. The memories of what had happened hit her with a terrifying clarity. The rituals, the magic, and the way Baba Olumide had taken control of her. "What's happening?" she whispered, her voice trembling as she tried to pull herself up. Bode watched her closely, his expression dark. "The spell is breaking," he said, his voice low and unsettling. "My father's hold on you is fading, but there's still one more thing to do, Shade." Her eyes darted toward him, and a feeling of dread washed over her. "What do you mean?" she asked, inching away from him. Bode's lips curled into a sinister smile. "To complete the process, there must be a transfer," he said, his words dripping with menace. "The magic won't fully release you unless there's a final act to seal it." Shade's pulse quickened as his meaning became horrifically clear. No, you can't!" She scrambled to her feet, but Bode grabbed her by the arm and pulled her back down with a force that knocked the breath out of her. "Don't fight it," he hissed. "I freed you from him. Now you're mine." The hut was filled with an eerie silence, broken only by the sound of Shade's quiet sobs. She lay on the floor, trembling, her body and spirit bruised. The act had been vile and brutal, a further violation on top of all she had endured. Bode had taken what he claimed was his, and in doing so, he had left her feeling even more trapped than before. She slowly pushed herself up, her limbs aching as she tried to gather her strength. Bode had fallen asleep nearby, his chest rising and falling steadily. She could still feel his touch, the weight of his body, and the darkness of his intentions clinging to her like a second skin. Shade's heart raced as she saw a small opening in the hut's wall. This was her chance. She couldn't stay there, not for another moment. She crawled silently toward the gap, her breath hitching as she squeezed through. Once outside, she broke into a desperate run, the cold night air biting at her skin. Shade's footsteps pounded against the forest floor as she fled into the darkness, her breaths coming in ragged gasps. The night was thick, the trees closing in around her like a cage. She didn't know where she was going. She only knew she had to get as far away as possible. The forest seemed endless, the branches clawing at her as if trying to pull her back. Bode's voice echoed through the night, taunting her. "You can run, Shade, but you'll never be free of me." His laughter carried through the air, chilling her to the bone. She stumbled, falling hard against a tree, but forced herself up, fueled by sheer terror. She could hear Bode's footsteps in the distance, growing louder as he searched for her. She had to keep moving. As the faint glow of the church's steeple emerged in the distance, Shade felt a glimmer of hope. She pushed herself toward it, the promise of sanctuary giving her a momentary surge of strength. If she could just reach the church, maybe, just maybe, she would be safe from him. "God help me," she whispered, clutching her chest. "I don't know what to do. I don't know if I'll ever be free." Shady threw open the doors of the church and stumbled inside, collapsing onto a pew. She looked around the empty sanctuary, the flickering candles and stained glass casting strange patterns on the floor. She breathed heavily, her whole body shaking. The oppressive silence of the church seemed to echo her despair. Even here, in this holy place, she felt the weight of Bode's violation and the darkness that seemed to cling to her. A sound at the back of the church caused her to snap her head up in alarm. Bode stood at the doorway, his face a mask of rage. She fell to her knees, tired from running. "Even here?" she cried out, backing away. "You would follow me even here?" He stepped forward, his expression cold and determined. "Did you really think you could escape me, Shade? There's no sanctuary from the consequences of your actions." Just as Bode began to approach, the elderly priest emerged from a side room, his eyes narrowing as he took in the scene. "This is a house of God," he said firmly, stepping between Bode and Shade. "Whatever darkness you bring with you, it has no power here." Bode sneered. "You have no idea what she's done. She deserves everything that's coming to her." The priest shook his head. "Perhaps, but vengeance is not yours to enact, nor is it welcome here." For a moment Bode hesitated, his eyes flickering with a mix of anger and uncertainty. Then with a growl he turned and stormed out of the church, leaving Shade trembling in the back pew. Shade remained in the church, her body slumped as she wept uncontrollably. She had been violated and used, first by the father and then by the son. What had she become? She had lost everything, her freedom, her dignity, and the friendship she once held dear. The weight of shame and despair pressed down on her, suffocating. The priest approached her cautiously. "Child," he said softly, "you have suffered greatly, but there is still a path to redemption. It will not be easy and the road may be long, but there is no sin too great for God's mercy." Shade looked up at him, her eyes filled with hopelessness. "Can I ever be free of this?" she whispered. "Will I ever escape my past?" The priest's voice was gentle yet resolute. "Only if you believe you are worthy of redemption, and only if you take the steps toward healing. Forgive yourself and you may find that you are stronger than you know." The church bells began to toll, signaling the beginning of the morning service. Shady bowed her head, tears streaming down her face as she whispered a desperate prayer. She didn't know if she would ever be whole again, but for the first time in what felt like an eternity, she allowed herself to hope. As Shade reflected on all that had happened, the hard lessons she had learned began to surface. She recognized that her obsession with gaining what others had led her down a path of destruction. She had thought she could manipulate fate, but the cost was far greater than she could bear. What isn't earned cannot truly be possessed. She had naively believed in the power of magic to solve her problems. Now she understood that meddling with forces beyond human control only invites darkness into one's life. The cost of such interference had been her freedom, her dignity, and her peace. She remembered her friend Bisi, who had always been there for her before she turned to dark paths. She now realized that true friendship is a gift that should never be taken for granted or sacrificed for selfish desires. Allowing herself to be manipulated had come from not valuing herself. Now, Shady understood that self-worth comes from within and starts with forgiveness. Reclaiming it was crucial for her healing. Shady had learned that while the past could not be changed, the future was still in her hands. Her story was not over. She could still seek redemption through sincere repentance and faith. Shade's journey is a reminder that no matter how far one falls, redemption is always possible. Her story serves as a cautionary tale about the consequences of dark magic, betrayal, and the choices we make. If you've ever needed a second chance, subscribe to our channel for more gripping stories that offer powerful lessons on life.